There's a moment inside every royal institution when silence stops being peace and becomes something else entirely, something closer to dread. On a gray London morning that most people would not remember, the gates of a royal residence froze. Not in the way gates freeze in cold weather. They froze because every person standing near them, every guard in pressed uniform, every aide with a clipboard, understood that what was happening in front of them was not supposed to happen. Not here. Not to this vehicle. Not to her. A car associated with Queen Camilla, the woman who had spent decades navigating one of the most scrutinized families in the world, was being searched by royal protection officers. And somewhere inside that residence, Prince William, the heir to the throne, was demanding answers that no one seemed willing to give. The British royal family has always operated in a world where appearances and reality live in separate rooms. The public sees the waves from palace balconies, the careful smiles at garden parties, the coordinated outfits at church services on Christmas morning. What the public does not see, and what the institution works very hard to keep out of sight, is the machinery underneath. The arguments behind closed doors. The decisions made over long, uncomfortable telephone calls. The moments when trust fractures, and no amount of protocol can hold it together. The day that royal protection officers were reported to have stopped and searched a vehicle connected to Queen Camilla, while Prince William separately made clear that he wanted a full explanation, was one of those moments. It was not the kind of thing that gets announced at a press conference. It was the kind of thing that leaks in fragments, a source here, a statement there, a carefully worded non-denial from a palace communications team, and only makes sense when you step back and look at the full picture of everything that had been building for years. To understand why that morning mattered, you have to go back further than most people are willing to go. The story of the relationship between William and Camilla is not a simple one, and it has never been. When Camilla Parker Bowles first became a permanent figure in Charles's life in the way that could no longer be quietly managed, William was a teenager who had just lost his mother. Diana, Princess of Wales, died in a Paris tunnel in August 1997. She was 36 years old. William was 15. The grief that followed was not just personal. It was public in a way that almost no grief in modern history has been. The entire world watched two young boys walk behind their mother's coffin. And the world knew, because Diana had spoken about it openly, that her marriage had been complicated by Charles's relationship with Camilla. William grew up inside that knowledge. He did not have the luxury of not knowing. The years that followed were managed carefully by the palace and by the people around William. He went to school, then university, then into the military. He met Catherine. He married her. He had children. Publicly, he appeared to make peace with his father's choices, and publicly he treated Camilla with the formality and courtesy that royal life required. But those who watched closely, those who knew how to read the small signals that the royals use instead of words, noticed things. A certain stiffness at joint appearances. A lack of the warmth that William extended easily to others. A sense that the relationship between the heir to the throne and the woman who had become his father's wife was functioning but not flourishing. When King Charles III was formally coronated in May 2023, Camilla was crowned beside him as queen. It was a historic moment, and it was handled with the full weight of royal ceremony. But even in that moment of institutional unity, observers noted what was present and what was absent. The symbolism was clear enough. Camilla was queen. That was now a fact of constitutional record. But the emotional reality inside the family, the unwritten ledger of old wounds and long memories, was a different document entirely. The reports that emerged about the vehicle search did not come with full transparency, because nothing involving the royal family and its security apparatus ever does. What was reported, through sources speaking to British media, was that protection officers had taken the unusual step of stopping and checking a vehicle associated with the Queen Consort at one of the royal residences. The specific circumstances, why the search was ordered, what the officers were looking for, what if anything was found, were not made fully public. Royal security operations are covered by layers of confidentiality that exist for legitimate reasons, and the palace is not in the habit of explaining its internal security decisions to journalists or to the public. But the fact that the incident became known at all told its own story. In royal circles, the things that leak are rarely accidents. When a story moves from inside the palace to outside it, someone has made a decision. Sometimes that decision is made by a journalist with a good source. Sometimes it is made, directly or indirectly, by someone inside the institution who wants the information in the public domain. The question of who benefits from any given story being told is always the right question to ask. And in this case, the story of a vehicle connected to Camilla being searched, with William said to be pressing for answers, landed in a very particular way. It landed as a story about power, about trust, about who inside the royal family was aligned with whom and who was not. William's reported demand for answers was significant for reasons that went beyond whatever the immediate incident was. It suggested that he either did not have full confidence in how the situation was being handled by others, or that he had been kept out of information that he believed he should have been told. Either interpretation pointed to a fault line. The heir to the throne occupying a different position than the reigning monarch's wife, both of them operating within the same institution, with the same protection apparatus and the same staff moving between their households. This was always a situation that required very careful management. If that management had broken down, even partially, even in one specific incident, it raised larger questions about the dynamics at play. It is worth noting what this story was not. It was not a story about criminal wrongdoing. It was not a story about a security breach in the conventional sense. It was a story about the internal mechanics of a family that is also an institution, operating under pressures that most families never have to face. The royal protection officers who carry out vehicle checks are not making independent decisions. They operate within a chain of command, and that chain ultimately leads to decisions made at very senior levels. When something unusual happens within that system, when a search is carried out that prompts the heir to the throne to seek an explanation, it means that something has disrupted the usual flow of information and authority. Something has happened that the normal protocols did not cover, or did not cover well enough. People who work within or around royal households speak about a concept they call institutional memory, the accumulated understanding of how things are supposed to work, built up over decades of practice and precedent. The problem with institutional memory is that it is held by people, not by documents, and people change. Staff move between households. Loyalties shift. Relationships evolve. The palace that existed when Diana was alive is not the same palace that exists today. The people who managed information then are not all the same people managing information now. And the relationships between the principals, the senior royals whose lives the institution exists to support, have changed in ways that are sometimes publicly documented and sometimes only visible through incidents like this one. The distance between William and Harry is well known and extensively documented. Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, their move to the United States, their various interviews, and the publication of Harry's memoir created ruptures that were visible to the entire world. What is less discussed is the way those ruptures reordered the internal dynamics among the royals who remained. When Harry left, the lines of alliance and communication shifted. William and Catherine became even more central to the institution's future. Charles and Camilla occupied the top of the formal hierarchy, and the question of how those two centers of gravity related to each other, not in public, where the answers were always carefully managed, but in private, where the real decisions were made, became increasingly relevant. Sources who spoke about the vehicle search incident described an atmosphere of visible tension at the residence where it occurred. Aides who were present understood quickly that this was not a routine matter. The way the search was conducted, the fact that it was conducted at all given whose vehicle was involved, and the subsequent reports that William had sought a direct explanation, all of this communicated something that the institution would ordinarily have worked hard to suppress. It communicated that the internal consensus, the agreement to keep family tensions behind closed doors, had momentarily broken down. Camilla's position has always been a complicated one to navigate. She came into the family's formal structure carrying decades of history that made her simultaneously indispensable to Charles and difficult for others to fully embrace. She had built genuine relationships with some members of the extended royal circle. She had engaged carefully with public life, taken on charitable work, made herself visible in ways that built gradual goodwill. By the time of the coronation, polling suggested that public acceptance of her as queen had grown considerably from where it had been in the years immediately after Diana's death. But public acceptance and private warmth are not the same thing, and within the family, the dynamics were always more layered than any official statement could capture. William, for his part, had consistently prioritized the stability of the institution that he would one day lead. He understood, and had said as much in various contexts, that the crown's survival depended on its ability to adapt while remaining credible. The choices he made about how to present himself publicly, as a working royal deeply invested in mental health, in conservation, in the future of the Commonwealth, were choices made with an awareness that he was building toward a reign, not just performing duties. A man thinking about his reign thinks carefully about the people around him, the information flows he can trust, and the relationships that will either support or complicate the work ahead. When a vehicle connected to the current queen is searched by protection officers and the future king asks why, the distance between those two facts is the story. It is not a comfortable story. It does not resolve neatly. The palace did not release a detailed statement explaining the incident. The people involved did not speak publicly. The search happened, the questions were asked, and then the doors closed again in the way that royal doors always close, firmly, completely, and with the expectation that what happened inside would remain inside. But it did not remain inside. It came out in fragments, the way these things always do when the tension inside the institution becomes too great to contain entirely. And what those fragments suggested was that on that gray London morning, the apparent unity of the royal family, the smiling tableau presented to the public at every formal occasion, was more fragile than it looked. That William and Camilla, who shared the same institution and the same family and the same public image of harmony, were navigating a private reality considerably more complicated than any official photograph could convey. The British monarchy has survived extraordinary pressures over the centuries. It has survived abdications and scandals and wars and the deaths of beloved figures. It has survived the kind of internal family conflicts that would destroy ordinary institutions precisely because it possesses something ordinary institutions do not, a symbolic weight that makes people willing to manage their private grievances in service of a larger continuity. William understands this. Camilla understands this. Charles, who has spent his entire adult life studying and thinking about the monarchy's future, understands it more deeply than perhaps anyone. But understanding the importance of institutional continuity does not make the private relationships easier. It only makes the management of those relationships more disciplined. The incident with the vehicle, whatever its specific technical cause or security rationale, became a moment when that discipline briefly faltered, when something that was meant to stay internal became partially visible, when the careful management of appearances and the messier reality underneath pulled apart, just enough, just for long enough, for people to see the gap. That is what the palace froze for on that gray morning, not because of any single dramatic event, but because the gap had shown itself, and everyone present understood exactly what it meant, and no one knew quite how to close it again. William wanted answers. The answers, if they were given quietly, behind doors that quickly closed. And the royal family moved forward, as it always does, presenting the face it chooses to show the world, composed, continuous, enduring, while everything complicated remained exactly where it has always lived. Out of sight, but never entirely out of reach.